A young waitress helped a drunk CEO. Now she's the CEO's wife. The bitter wind outside rattled the windows of Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant in Chicago's financial district. Inside, Jasmine Williams, just 26, moved with quiet focus in her black server uniform and white apron. At one corner table, David Mitchell, 34, sat slumped in his expensive charcoal suit, silk tie loosened, with empty wine glasses scattered across the white tablecloth. Other staff whispered about the man's condition, debating whether to call the manager. But Jasmine stepped closer, noticing his trembling hands reaching for his car keys. In a single, careful motion, she slid them away from the table. The moment Jasmine Williams quietly slipped those keys from the drunk businessman's grip, she had no idea she was stepping into the first chapter of a story that would make her the wife of Chicago's most powerful CEO. David was not just another customer who had overindulged. He was a man unraveling from pressures no one else could see. Jasmine chose compassion instead of judgment, staying by his side when others backed away. What happened after that decision would reshape both of their lives. Stay with us, subscribe, share your location in the comments, and don't miss tomorrow's story. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Let's begin. Jasmine Williams grew up on the south side of Chicago, in the Bronzeville neighborhood. Bronzeville carried a proud history, once known as the Black Metropolis, a center of culture and ambition during the early 20th century. But for Jasmine's generation, opportunity came with obstacles. She lived in a modest brick apartment with her mother and younger brother. Her grandmother had spent decades cleaning homes for wealthy families on the Gold Coast. Her mother carried that same strength into long nights cleaning offices in the Loop. Jasmine grew up surrounded by examples of hard work. From her grandmother she learned dignity in labor, no matter how invisible it seemed. From her mother, she learned sacrifice. Education was stressed as the path forward, and Jasmine excelled in school. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, someone who could give back to children the way her best mentors had inspired her. But life pressed in with its own demands. The rising cost of tuition, student loan debt, and the need to help her family survive forced her to set aside that dream. By her early 20s, Jasmine was working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant in the financial district, became her evening shift. There she stood night after night in her black uniform and white apron, serving Chicago's business elite. To Jasmine, it was not just about taking orders. She memorized regulars' preferences, understood who needed space and who welcomed conversation, and handled complaints with calm precision. Colleagues often marveled at her ability to sense the mood of a table before anyone said a word. To some, waiting tables might have seemed like a stopgap job, but Jasmine carried herself with a quiet pride. She understood that every honest role deserved respect, and she found ways to make meaning in her work. It wasn't teaching in a classroom, but she still touched lives in small ways, through kindness, patience, and the way she made even demanding patrons feel acknowledged. On the other side of Chicago, in a gleaming Gold Coast penthouse, David Mitchell lived a life that seemed the opposite of Jasmine's. Born in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a middle-class family, David had grown up in a home where expectations were high and resources were steady, but not abundant. He had earned his place at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, excelling in finance and leadership. Ambition pushed him forward, and within a decade, he had built Mitchell and Associates into a major investment firm with offices overlooking Lake Michigan. At only 34, David managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions. His name carried weight in Chicago's financial circles. He wore tailored suits, attended power lunches, and sat at the head of boardroom tables. But success carried a price that no balance sheet could measure. His marriage ended in a bitter divorce. His ex-wife moved to Denver with their young daughter, leaving him with a legal custody agreement that felt more like a contract than a connection. The penthouse where David returned each night offered sweeping views of Navy Pier and Lake Michigan. Yet for all its glass and steel elegance, the space felt empty. His schedule was consumed by market pressures, late-night calls with overseas clients, and constant strategizing to stay ahead of competitors. Friends became business contacts, and business contacts rarely became friends. His personal life narrowed until the silence of his apartment became almost unbearable. The contrast between Jasmine's world and David's could not have been sharper. She came from Bronzeville, where family ties and survival shaped every decision. He came from boardrooms and balance sheets, where deals determined reputations. She served the city's elite at Romano's. He was one of the people being served. Yet beneath those differences lay common ground neither of them could see yet, a deep loneliness. Jasmine longed for the teaching career she had put on hold and the stability her family never had. David longed for meaningful connection, something his money and success had failed to provide. Chicago in February intensified these divides. The city's wind cut through layers of clothing, and the cold kept most people off the streets. Romano's, however, remained a warm refuge. Its mahogany-paneled walls, crystal glassware, and candlelit tables made it a sanctuary for executives escaping the frozen streets. It was here that Jasmine carried trays of pasta and wine, moving gracefully among men and women who signed contracts worth millions while she worked to make ends meet. It was here that David, one bitter winter night, walked in carrying the weight of his collapsing week. Romano's had always been more than a restaurant. For the city's financial elite, it was an extension of their offices, a place where reputations were built and lost. Waiters and servers moved discreetly, understanding that conversations at their tables often involved more money than most families would see in a lifetime. For Jasmine, Romano's was steady work, but also a stage where she could observe the people who shaped Chicago's economy. She noticed the way powerful men carried their stress, the way deals were sealed with a firm handshake, and the way loneliness sometimes showed through even the most confident exterior. Jasmine's world was one of endurance, finding purpose in each shift and drawing strength from the lessons her family instilled. David's world was one of relentless ambition, earning admiration in public, but carrying emptiness in private. Their paths should never have crossed beyond the simple exchange of order and service. Yet on one freezing February night, at Romano's, the two worlds collided. The night that brought Jasmine and David together began with the weight of failure pressing down on him harder than ever before. For years, David Mitchell had been the kind of man who appeared unshakable in public. He led board meetings with authority, reassured nervous investors with a calm tone, and carried himself as though no setback could break his stride. But this particular week had pushed him to the edge. A client worth $50 million had pulled out of Mitchell and Associates, blaming David's firm for losses that had been caused by unpredictable market swings. The departure was more than financial, it was a blow to his reputation. Word spread quickly in Chicago's financial district, and whispers began circulating that a larger rival firm was preparing a hostile takeover. Inside the boardroom, the pressure intensified. Directors who had once praised David's leadership now questioned his ability to protect the company. Their voices carried more doubt than confidence. He left those meetings with the taste of failure heavy in his mouth and the gnawing fear that years of work could collapse overnight. When he walked into Romano's that Thursday evening, the February wind cut sharply across his face, reminding him of the cold reality outside the protective walls of his office. His original plan had been simple: eat a quiet meal, take a moment to breathe, and gather his strength for the battles ahead. Yet as the waiter poured him a glass of wine, his plan dissolved. One glass turned into two, and two into a bottle. The stress, the loneliness, and the relentless expectations finally broke through the shell he had built around himself. By 9 o'clock, the strong, confident executive was slouched in his chair. His silk tie hung loose, his suit jacket draped carelessly over the back of the chair, and his words tumbled out in a slur. Colleagues from the financial district might have recognized him, but they would not have recognized this version of him, exhausted, broken, and drowning in alcohol. From across the dining room, the staff noticed. Whispers spread quickly. He's had too much. Should we call the manager? The common instinct was to treat him as a problem to be managed, another intoxicated businessman with no control. But Jasmine Williams saw something different. She had witnessed her own father struggle with alcohol during hard times, and she recognized the signs of a man overwhelmed by more than just drink. She approached his table quietly, not with irritation but with calm attention. When David reached for his car keys, his hand trembled. Without hesitation, Jasmine stepped forward and with a gentle motion slid the keys away from him. She placed them safely out of reach, avoiding a confrontation but ensuring he would not leave the restaurant and endanger himself or others. At first, David muttered protests, trying to insist he was fine. But as he looked up at Jasmine, her steady presence broke through the fog. She refilled his water glass, spoke softly, and listened as he began to ramble. The words came out unevenly at first, fragments of frustration and self-pity. He spoke about his failures as a father, about missing his daughter in Denver, about the crushing weight of expectations that no success could satisfy. He admitted his fear of losing everything he had built. These were thoughts he never voiced in boardrooms or business dinners, but in his intoxicated state, they spilled out before the waitress who had chosen to listen. Jasmine did not judge him. She didn't rush him or remind him of who he was supposed to be. She simply stood by his side, offering small reassurances and a steady presence. Sometimes life hits us so hard, we forget we're stronger than we think, she said softly, her voice cutting through the haze with unexpected clarity. Hours passed. Other servers finished their shifts, the dining room emptied, and still Jasmine stayed nearby. Her manager allowed her to remain, recognizing that she was handling the situation with rare patience. She ensured David drank water, encouraged him to eat a small plate of food, and gently reminded him that he would be safer waiting before heading home. By the time the clock neared 11, the streets outside had grown quieter, coated in ice from the relentless winter. David, though still unsteady, insisted on leaving. Jasmine knew he could not navigate the night alone. She arranged a rideshare for him and, when it arrived, offered to ride along to make sure he reached his apartment in the Gold Coast safely. The 20-minute drive cut through the heart of downtown Chicago. Streetlights reflected off the frozen sidewalks. As the car passed Millennium Park and the Art Institute, David leaned back, his voice softer now, less slurred but still burdened. For the first time that night, he turned to Jasmine with genuine curiosity. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. His tone carried confusion, as if kindness was something he did not expect. Jasmine looked out at the city lights shimmering on Lake Michigan before answering. "Because sometimes we all need someone to believe we're worth saving." The words landed with a weight he could not ignore. In that quiet moment, he no longer saw her as a server clearing tables. He saw a person of strength, compassion, and clarity at a time when he had none. When the car pulled up to his building, Jasmine made sure he reached his door safely. She offered no lecture, no judgment, only a simple wish for him to rest. Then she left, returning to her own neighborhood with little thought of what her actions might mean in the long run. For David, the night ended not just with the haze of alcohol, but with the memory of a woman who had treated him with dignity when he least deserved it. For Jasmine, it was another night of choosing compassion over convenience. Neither of them knew it then, but that single evening at Romano's was the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives. David woke the next morning with a pounding headache and a sense of shame that no medicine could dull. He replayed flashes of the night. Too many glasses of wine, words spoken without control, and a stranger's kindness holding the evening together. For a man who prided himself on discipline and composure, the memory cut deeply. By late afternoon, he found himself back at Romano's. He could have stayed away, hoping no one remembered. But gratitude outweighed pride. Jasmine was working her shift, moving between tables with the same calm presence she had shown the night before. When she approached his table, David stood and apologized. He offered a generous tip, but more than money, he expressed his thanks. "You didn't have to do any of that," he told her, his voice steadier than it had been in months. "But you did. What could have ended with that single exchange became something more. David returned again the next week, then again after that. At first, his visits were cautious, framed as dinners where he happened to be seated in her section. Soon, it became clear that he sought out her presence. Their conversations began simply, as Jasmine refilled his glass or brought his meal. He asked how her week was. She asked about his work. What struck David most was not her politeness, but her ability to listen. She remembered details. The kind of tea he preferred after dinner, the way he took his steak, the quiet sigh he made when his day had been difficult. Unlike in his boardroom, where every exchange carried an agenda, Jasmine's attention felt genuine. Over time, David started noticing more. He saw how she managed tense customers with grace, softening conflicts before they escalated. He watched her recall small details about regular patrons, birthdays, favorite dishes, even the stories they had told weeks earlier. To her colleagues, these gestures seemed effortless, but to David, they revealed a rare skill: emotional intelligence, the ability to understand people beyond words. As winter gave way to early spring, David's conversations with Jasmine extended beyond the restaurant. They began walking along the Chicago Riverwalk during her breaks, or meeting for coffee on her days off. Beneath the skyline, surrounded by the hum of the city, they shared parts of themselves that had long been hidden. Jasmine spoke about growing up in Bronzeville, about her grandmother's long hours in other people's homes, and about her mother's tireless cleaning shifts. She told him about her dream of becoming a teacher, a dream paused by debt and responsibility, but never completely extinguished. David, in turn, opened up about his divorce. He confessed the hollow feeling of returning to a penthouse that looked impressive, but offered no comfort. He admitted the fear that his daughter was slipping away from him, her life in Denver unfolding without him present. For perhaps the first time since he was a student, he spoke without performance or calculation. Their bond grew not through grand gestures, but through these steady, honest exchanges. David, who had built his identity on financial victories, began to see that true connection had little to do with status. Jasmine, who had spent years serving others, recognized that beneath his wealth, David was a man as vulnerable as anyone. One evening, as they walked near Navy Pier, David shared a frustration from work. A long-standing client, a man who owned a growing restaurant chain, had become increasingly difficult to manage. Despite excellent financial returns, the client felt ignored and was threatening to withdraw his accounts. David's team had run through every analytical strategy they could think of, but nothing satisfied him. David mentioned the situation almost in passing, more to vent than to seek advice. Jasmine listened carefully before offering her perspective. "He doesn't need more numbers right now," she said. "He needs you to understand his story. He started with one restaurant, built it from the ground up, and now he's protecting what he created. To him, it's not just money. It's pride. It's legacy." David paused. Her words struck a truth he had overlooked. In his world, numbers spoke loudly, but to this client, respect for his journey mattered more. The next time David met with the client, he shifted his approach. Instead of leading with charts and forecasts, he asked questions about how the business had started, what challenges the man faced in those early years, and what his hopes were for the future. The effect was immediate. The client relaxed, opened up, and by the end of the meeting, not only agreed to stay but referred additional accounts to Mitchell and Associates. David returned to Jasmine, astonished. "You just saved us millions," he told her, half in disbelief. For Jasmine, it was a simple observation born of listening and empathy. For David, it was a revelation that her insights could succeed where traditional strategies failed. He began sharing more with her, not just about his personal life, but about his professional challenges. Each time, her perspective offered clarity he had missed. By the time Chicago's spring flowers began lining the parks, their relationship had shifted quietly but undeniably. Romano's was no longer just a restaurant where David sought comfort. It had become the backdrop for the recognition of something far greater. The rare meeting of two people from different worlds who saw each other clearly. For Jasmine, David was not defined by his wealth or his failures. For David, Jasmine was not simply a waitress, but a woman whose strength, intelligence, and compassion illuminated every conversation. In the gentle rhythm of dinners, walks, and quiet talks, recognition turned into connection, and connection became the foundation for something that neither of them could have predicted at the start of that bitter February night. As spring gave way to summer, David and Jasmine's connection began to take root in the spaces between their busy lives. What had started as conversations at Romano's stretched into coffee breaks, then into lunch dates near Millennium Park or walks along the lakefront. Away from the formality of restaurant tables and corner offices, they discovered an ease that surprised them both. David had spent years in a world defined by quarterly reports and aggressive negotiations. Yet, sitting across from Jasmine with a simple cup of coffee, he found himself discussing topics he hadn't considered in years. Books he once loved, questions about purpose, even the quiet joy of slowing down. Jasmine, who balanced multiple jobs and family obligations, brought a perspective that was both practical and deeply thoughtful. One afternoon on the lakefront, David asked what she had been reading. Jasmine mentioned a novel about resilience and human dignity, tying it to her own experiences of working long hours while still believing in something greater. David was struck not only by her interpretation of the story, but by how naturally she connected its lessons to real life. "You see people in ways most don't," he told her, genuinely moved. Their talks often shifted to business, not because Jasmine sought it out, but because David increasingly valued her perspective. When he described a client who had become resistant to standard financial strategies, Jasmine offered simple, human-centered advice that consistently proved effective. In one case, her suggestion about rethinking how Mitchell and Associates handled communication helped secure an account worth millions. David could hardly believe how her instincts, grounded in empathy and observation, outpaced the polished theories of consultants with advanced degrees. He began to recognize Jasmine's natural gift for understanding people, a quality he realized was missing in his professional circle. At dinners with colleagues, he would often recall her words, weaving them into strategies that yielded surprising success. Over time, Mitchell and Associates wasn't just surviving. It was adapting, reshaped by insights that started in conversations along the Chicago Riverwalk or during a quiet meal. But their bond was not built on business alone. The summer unfolded with moments that belonged entirely to them. They explored Grant Park during music festivals, blending into the crowd where no one cared about titles or suits. They laughed on the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier, Jasmine teasing David for his slight unease with heights. In those settings, David wasn't the CEO of a major firm. He was simply a man rediscovering joy in someone's company. For Jasmine, the experiences were equally transformative. She had long carried the weight of responsibility, helping her mother, supporting her younger siblings, working shifts to make ends meet. With David, she found space to share her own dreams without fear of dismissal. He listened intently when she spoke of her desire to someday return to school, and for the first time in years, she felt those ambitions were within reach. As weeks turned into months, it became clear to both of them that what they shared was no fleeting connection. The depth of their conversations, the ease of their silences, the way they navigated challenges together, all pointed toward something lasting. David, who had once measured his worth in contracts and mergers, now measured his days in moments with Jasmine. One evening, as summer edged toward fall, David asked Jasmine to join him for a walk along the Chicago Riverwalk. The city lights shimmered across the water, and the air carried the warmth of late August. They stopped near a quiet spot where the hum of traffic softened, and for a moment, it felt as though the bustling city had stepped back, giving them space. David turned to her, his expression earnest. "You've given me more than you realize," he began. "I thought success was about numbers, buildings, power. But you reminded me that none of that matters if there's no one to share it with. That night at Romano's, you didn't see a man failing. You saw someone worth saving. And you were right. You saved me from an empty life." Jasmine looked at him, startled by the weight of his words. Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and revealed a small box. Inside was a simple but elegant ring, its design understated, chosen with care rather than extravagance. He continued, his voice steady. "I don't want another day to pass without knowing you're beside me. Jasmine Williams, will you marry me?" For a brief moment, the city noise seemed distant. Jasmine's eyes welled with emotion, not because of the ring or the proposal's setting, but because she understood the sincerity in his words. She nodded, a quiet yes escaping her lips, carrying with it the weight of everything they had both endured to reach this point. In that moment, the bond that began with a compassionate act in a crowded restaurant had grown into something far greater. Their worlds, once separated by class and circumstance, had converged into a partnership rooted in respect, understanding, and love. When David proposed, Jasmine felt both joy and weight pressing on her shoulders. She loved him, that much was clear, but love alone could not erase the reality of their differences. He was a high-profile CEO, scrutinized by business media and shareholders. She was a woman from Bronzeville, raised in modest circumstances, still helping her family cover bills. Accepting his proposal meant stepping into a world where every move might be judged. In the quiet days that followed, she thought carefully. Could she handle the spotlight of his professional life? Could her family feel comfortable in spaces filled with wealth and privilege? Would his colleagues and clients see her for who she was, or dismiss her as someone who did not belong? David, sensing her hesitation, gave her space. He didn't pressure her, but he made clear that his desire to marry her was not about appearances. "I don't care what people think," he told her one evening as they walked the lakefront. "I care about you. I care about us." His words weren't rehearsed or polished. They carried the sincerity of a man who had already been reshaped by her presence. Over time, Jasmine realized that her doubts were not about David, but about the fear of losing herself. What steadied her was the recognition that he valued her voice. He had already shown that he listened to her insights, her experiences, her wisdom. This wasn't a man seeking someone to fit into his world. This was a man eager to build a new world with her. Her decision became clear. With quiet conviction, she said yes not only to David, but to the life they could create together. Months later, on a crisp spring afternoon, their wedding took place at the Chicago Cultural Center beneath the famed Tiffany glass dome. The setting was breathtaking, but what made it remarkable was the diversity of the guest list. David's business partners and board members sat alongside Jasmine's family, neighbors, and childhood friends. It was a gathering that bridged two different worlds, united by the couple at the center. Jasmine wore an elegant gown chosen for its simplicity rather than extravagance. David, in a tailored suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle. Their vows were spoken with clarity, free of performance. They promised partnership, respect, and love that endured beyond circumstances. As the ceremony concluded, the room filled with applause that wasn't just polite, it was heartfelt. Some of David's peers were struck by Jasmine's poise and authenticity. Some of Jasmine's relatives admitted later that they saw a side of David they hadn't expected. A man humbled, deeply grateful, and clearly transformed. The reception carried the same balance. Jazz musicians filled the air with warmth, while conversations crossed boundaries of status and background. Jasmine's grandmother shared a dance with one of David's longtime colleagues. Laughter filled the hall, not from wealth or status, but from the shared recognition that something rare and genuine was unfolding. Afterward, the newlyweds embarked on a honeymoon that reflected their desire to experience America together, not through luxury resorts, but through cities rich with history and character. Their first stop was Savannah, where they walked beneath oak trees and visited historic squares, reflecting on resilience and the passage of time. From there, they traveled to Detroit. David wanted Jasmine to see the city's rebirth, the grit and determination echoing stories she had told him about her own community. They visited museums, spoke with local artists, and walked through neighborhoods where restoration was in progress. For David, it was a reminder that success is measured not only by wealth, but by the ability to rebuild and renew. For Jasmine, it was confirmation that stories of struggle and triumph were everywhere, not just in her own life. Their final stop was Austin, where the energy of music festivals and diverse communities reminded them of the joy of being surrounded by creativity. They spent evenings listening to live bands, sharing meals at food trucks, and blending into crowds that valued expression over status. Each city reflected a different part of the American story: heritage, resilience, creativity. And in each place, they found parallels to their own journey. What began as two lives separated by class and circumstance had merged into a shared path rooted in understanding. By the time they returned to Chicago, Jasmine carried not just the memory of a beautiful wedding, but the certainty of a decision made with clarity. She had not stepped into David's world to lose herself. Together, they had built something new, equal parts her strength and his willingness to change. Their marriage was not the conclusion of their story, but the beginning of a partnership that promised growth, respect, and love strong enough to bridge differences. For Jasmine, it was proof that compassion could alter the course of a life. For David, it was evidence that true wealth was measured not in numbers, but in connection. When people first hear that a waitress married a wealthy CEO, they often expect a tale about luck or circumstance. But the truth behind David and Jasmine's story is far more meaningful. Their marriage grew out of lessons that speak to universal human experiences, lessons that reshaped not only their relationship, but their sense of purpose. The first lesson came on that winter night at Romano's when Jasmine chose compassion over judgment. It would have been easy for her to call a manager, label David a problem, and walk away. Instead, she paused, looked beyond the disheveled suit and the slurred words, and saw a human being in need. That single act changed the course of both their lives. For David, who had grown used to being measured by performance and wealth, it was the first time in years that someone cared for him without expecting anything in return. For Jasmine, it reaffirmed a belief she had carried since childhood, that dignity comes from how we treat people when they are most vulnerable. The second lesson was about the nature of success. David had the corner office, the luxury penthouse, and the influence that came with leading an investment firm. Yet those things left him empty. They did not heal his broken marriage or ease the loneliness of evenings spent staring at the skyline. Jasmine's presence revealed the difference between achievements on paper and achievements of the heart. A deal closed could impress investors, but a meaningful relationship could restore a person's soul. He learned that success without connection was hollow, while even modest circumstances, when shared with someone who truly cared, carried a richness that money could never buy. Their journey also demonstrated that wisdom is not confined to diplomas or credentials. David had earned his MBA from Northwestern, a credential that opened doors and cemented his authority in business circles. Yet time after time, Jasmine's observations helped him solve problems he and his team struggled with. She saw details that others overlooked: the pride of a client, the frustrations of employees, the subtle cues that numbers could not explain. Her ability to understand people gave David an advantage that no textbook could offer. What mattered was not the letters after her name, but the depth of her empathy and the clarity of her insight. Through her, David came to see that intelligence wears many forms, and that experience and compassion often cut deeper than formal education. Perhaps the most profound lesson was about love itself. David and Jasmine came from different racial, economic, and social backgrounds. In another context, those differences might have kept them apart. Yet their relationship proved that respect and shared values can bridge divides that society often exaggerates. David did not see Jasmine as someone from a lesser world, and Jasmine did not view David as a symbol of privilege. They saw each other as equals, two people who had faced challenges in different forms, but found strength in walking together. Their story challenged stereotypes. It showed that love is not defined by income brackets, neighborhood zip codes, or the color of skin. Instead, it grows where people are willing to listen, to honor each other's humanity, and to learn from differences rather than fear them. These lessons continued to shape their lives after the wedding. David carried Jasmine's compassion into his leadership, transforming the culture of his firm from one driven solely by numbers to one that valued relationships and community investment. Jasmine, in turn, gained the confidence to step into roles she had once thought out of reach, contributing her wisdom to a field that had long overlooked voices like hers. For both of them, the power of their story was not in grand statements, but in the everyday choices that reflected these lessons. The way David now treated waitstaff and service workers, with genuine gratitude rather than automatic courtesy. The way Jasmine encouraged young people from her neighborhood, reminding them that their voices mattered even if they lacked traditional credentials. The way they both sought to live not just as partners in marriage, but as partners in demonstrating that compassion, authenticity, wisdom, and respect remain the foundations of a meaningful life. Their journey did not erase challenges. They still faced criticism from some of David's peers who whispered about the unusual match. Jasmine still carried responsibilities to her family that reminded her of the distance between Bronzeville and the Gold Coast. Yet those challenges only reinforced the truth of the lessons they had lived. It was not the absence of struggle that made their story remarkable. It was their ability to find love and strength across those divides. In the end, their marriage became more than a personal bond. It stood as an example that others could see and learn from. Compassion over judgment. Success that includes authentic connection. Wisdom beyond credentials. Love that crosses boundaries. These were not abstract ideals. They were daily realities for David and Jasmine, proven in the choices they made and the life they built together. In the years that followed their wedding, David and Jasmine settled into a rhythm of life that reflected both change and continuity. Their home was a renovated brownstone in Lincoln Park, just blocks from the lakefront. The house was filled not with lavish decorations but with warmth. Shelves lined with books Jasmine had collected since college, photographs of family gatherings, and art from local Chicago creators. Each morning, when weather allowed, they walked together along the lake. These walks became their shared ritual, a time to talk about work, family, and the future without distraction. David's professional life shifted significantly. Where his firm once measured success by quarterly reports alone, under his leadership it began placing equal weight on relationships and community engagement. He made space for conversations that went beyond numbers, asking clients not only about their portfolios, but also about the legacy they wanted to leave. This approach, once unconventional in the investment world, began setting Mitchell and Associates apart. Clients appreciated being treated as people rather than accounts, and many noted that David seemed different, more present, more attentive than he had been in years past. Much of that evolution was rooted in Jasmine's influence. Though she had never planned to step into the corporate world, she became a natural fit in client relations. Her ability to remember personal details, to sense when someone felt overlooked, and to respond with sincerity quickly made her invaluable. While David handled the technical and financial strategy, Jasmine provided the human connection that turned transactions into lasting partnerships. She did not attempt to become what she was not. She brought her authentic self into a setting that had long lacked that kind of perspective. Her role was not formal at first. She attended dinners, met clients casually, and offered thoughts when asked. But over time, even senior members of the firm noticed that outcomes were better when Jasmine was involved. A hesitant client might sign after a conversation with her, or a tense meeting might ease once she offered a grounded observation. Eventually, the firm officially welcomed her as part of its leadership team in client relations, a title that reflected what had already been true in practice. The ripple effects of her presence extended beyond the firm. David, who had once treated service interactions with the detachment of a man always in a hurry, now approached them differently. Whether at a cafe, a hotel, or even back at Romano's, he expressed genuine gratitude to staff. He remembered names, tipped fairly, and carried himself with humility. Employees often whispered afterward that it was rare to see someone in his position treat them with such respect. David never announced these changes publicly. They were simply habits shaped by Jasmine's example. Jasmine also carried forward her lifelong instinct to see potential in others. She remained deeply connected to her Bronzeville roots, visiting schools and community centers, speaking with young people who often doubted their chances to rise beyond their circumstances. She told them about her own path, not as a fairy tale, but as proof that dignity and persistence matter. Many students who met her said later that they left those conversations believing they had more options than they realized. Their influence in the community was not built on large foundations or headline-grabbing donations. Instead, it was built on consistency. They funded scholarships quietly, supported local businesses by choosing them over more prominent names, and opened their home for neighborhood events where people from different walks of life could connect. It was never about appearances. It was about demonstrating, through daily choices, that success carries responsibility. What made their impact striking was its subtlety. They did not position themselves as saviors or role models. They lived their values openly, and others noticed. Colleagues spoke about the new culture at Mitchell and Associates. Neighbors spoke about seeing David and Jasmine walking together, approachable and grounded despite their influence. Former employees at Romano's spoke about how Jasmine never lost her respect for service work. These small stories carried forward, inspiring others without the need for grand declarations. Their marriage itself stood as a quiet statement. In a city known for its divisions by wealth and race, they were proof that such boundaries were not absolute. Walking into a restaurant together, attending cultural events, or simply talking with families in the park, they represented something larger than themselves. The possibility of connection across divides when respect leads the way. Years after their first meeting, David often thought back to that February night at Romano's. The memory no longer filled him with shame, but with gratitude. He saw it as the turning point not only in his personal life, but in the life of his company and community. Jasmine, too, reflected on it, not as the moment she rescued a man, but as the moment she chose kindness and discovered where that choice could lead. Their ongoing impact wasn't measured in headlines or awards. It was measured in the quiet acknowledgments from people who had been touched by their presence, a client who felt heard, a student who dared to apply to college, an employee who felt respected by someone in power. Those moments, multiplied over time, became their legacy. The story of David and Jasmine is, at its core, a story about transformation. David, once a man defined entirely by his career, had become a partner capable of balance, empathy, and authenticity. He learned that personal growth requires more than ambition. It demands openness to change and humility in moments of weakness. That bitter February night at Romano's, when he had been at his lowest, became the pivot for a life-altering second chance. Jasmine's influence on him was profound, yet it did not diminish her own strength. From Bronzeville to the Gold Coast, she carried herself with dignity and pride, never allowing the circumstances of her life to define her value. Her work as a waitress, though humble, had instilled patience, observation, and compassion, qualities that later shaped both her personal life and David's business. She had shown that no role is too small to cultivate skills that can transform the future. Their partnership also reflected enduring American values: opportunity, transformation, and the belief that character outweighs circumstance. Two lives from different social and economic backgrounds converged not by accident, but through choices grounded in respect, kindness, and shared purpose. Their story proved that meaningful success comes not only from ambition or resources, but from integrity, empathy, and commitment to relationships that matter. In their home, in Lincoln Park, these values played out in small but consistent ways. Morning walks along the lake reminded them to pause and reflect. Evenings spent hosting friends, family, or colleagues created moments of shared understanding. David continued to run his firm with attention to human connection, while Jasmine applied her insight to guide decisions that prioritized people alongside profit. The legacy of their choices reached further than their immediate circle. Students from Bronzeville, inspired by Jasmine's example, began pursuing education and careers with newfound confidence. Clients and employees of Mitchell and Associates experienced interactions that valued their dignity and humanity. Colleagues observed that leadership could be compassionate without sacrificing effectiveness. In subtle ways, these effects multiplied, creating communities shaped by consideration rather than just ambition. At the heart of it all was the power of quiet human kindness. A single act of care, Jasmine's decision to stay with David on that winter night, rippled outward in ways neither could have predicted. Their marriage, though celebrated in a formal ceremony, became meaningful through the countless small acts that followed, listening, supporting, encouraging, and challenging one another to grow. This daily commitment demonstrated that profound change often arises from moments that may appear ordinary but carry extraordinary consequences. David and Jasmine's story encourages reflection on the value of personal growth and the importance of recognizing potential where it might otherwise be overlooked. It reminds us that the paths we follow can shift dramatically when someone extends understanding at the right moment. Their journey illustrates that resilience, humility, and compassion remain powerful tools for shaping lives, communities, and institutions. As we conclude this story, consider the moments in your own life where kindness or attention could create impact. How might listening, guiding, or simply believing in someone transform their future? Stories like David and Jasmine's are not just entertainment. They are examples of what is possible when human values guide our choices. If you found their journey inspiring, subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore lives transformed by courage, compassion, and opportunity. Share your location in the comments and help us connect with communities around the country. Your support allows us to bring these narratives to life and inspire others to recognize the extraordinary potential within everyday moments. This story is a reminder that change begins quietly, often unseen, but with lasting effect. It demonstrates that personal growth, second chances, and respect for all work can create outcomes that transcend wealth, status, or circumstance. Through Jasmine and David, we see that when character leads the way, lives can be reshaped, communities strengthened, and human connection restored.